The goal of training isn't to be fit for a season. The goal of training is to be fit when you're 70. In my clinic, I work with CrossFit athletes, runners, Broadway performers, and lifelong movers. And the athletes who stay strong decade after decade have something in common. They don't just train hard, they build athletic resilience. Today, we're breaking down the framework behind that. Let's get into it. Welcome to Cue the Burn, where performance meets grit and recovery is just part of the show. I'm your host, Mark Lusk, manual physical therapist, former professional dancer, and lifelong athlete who's still chasing the fire well into my 50s. This podcast is all about the science, stories, and strategies that fuel high-performing bodies. Whether you're on stage, under a barbell, or navigating the grind of urban life, from injury prevention to mental resilience, we're diving deep into what it takes to stay strong, mobile, and ready for whatever role life casts you in. Cue the music, cue the lights, cue the burn. Let's go. In this episode, we're talking about athletic resilience. As a professional dancer, I sustained a major injury and surgery in my early 20s. I bounced back quickly because I was young and in peak condition, but I had to learn some things early on, very quickly, especially if I wanted to have a career with my body. My injury was outside of my control, but my current body, at 53, is by design. Because the truth is, injuries, burnout, and decline are not inevitable parts of aging, but they are common when athletes neglect the pillars that support performance. Today, I'm sharing the 5 pillars I see in athletes who keep thriving in their 60s and 70s. So what is athletic resilience? Athletic resilience is your body's capacity to absorb stress, recover, and adapt. That means you can train hard. You can adapt to different training stimuli, meaning different types of movements and intensities of strain. You can recover well, and you can sustain that performance for months, years, and decades. Think of it like the suspension system on a high-performance car. Powerful engine matters, but if the suspension can't absorb the bumps and the turns, the system is going to break down. In athletes, that breakdown shows up as tendon pain, stress reaction in the bones, chronic joint irritation or degeneration, and recurring injuries. For example, research in high-performance athletes shows that over 30% experience tendinopathy with higher rates in athletes exposed to extreme training loads. That doesn't mean training is the problem. It means that capacity has to match the load, and your body has to be able to manage the damage. Injuries happen when that balance gets out of whack. That's where resilience comes in. Pillar 1, movement quality. As a manual physical therapist, I'm always looking at movement quality. And movement quality can include the joint mobility and the range of motion, flexibility, something we call motor control, coordination, and efficient movement patterns. These qualities encompass much of what we address in the clinic. Every single patient is the body's mechanical capacity, its neuromuscular function, and its motor control. In the clinic, we treat all of these constantly and in tandem to each other. A stiff ankle leads to altered mechanics, and that altered load moves up the system to the knee or the hip, and eventually the system complains. I often say, when we lack range of motion, we're going to make it up somewhere else. Think of it like this. If you've got a misaligned tire on a car, you can keep running it around the track, but you're going to blow out that tire again and again and again unless you've got an aligned system. That's why manual therapy is so important, because you can't strengthen your way out of mechanical dysfunctions. The goal isn't perfect movement. The goal is efficient movement that distributes load across the tissues instead of concentrating stress in one area. Pillar 2, strength capacity. Continuing that car analogy, if movement quality is the steering and alignment, strength capacity is the engine. Strength capacity, or that horsepower, isn't just about lifting heavier weights. It's about building tissue tolerance and being able to continue putting your tissues through that strain. Your muscles, tendons, and bones all adapt to load. Resistance training can increase the strength of connective tissues, including the tendons and the ligaments and the cartilage, which helps to protect joints during sports. Strength training also helps maintain bone density and structural integrity as we age. Longitudinal research on masters athletes shows that those who maintained regular strength and sprint training preserved or improved tibial bone density over a decade, while less trained peers lost bone strength. So strength is not just performance, it's structural armor. For runners, one example comes from a marathon training study where athletes who could hold a single leg glute bridge for 20 to 30 seconds had significantly lower injury risk than those with weaker hip endurance. Translation: strong hips, strong posterior chain, strong core equals protected joints. Those are the foundations that allow athletes to keep showing up. Our third pillar is recovery systems. This is the pillar that most athletes underestimate. You've got to be able to manage the damage. Recovery isn't passive. Recovery is where adaptation actually happens. Your training session provides the stimulus and the strain, but recovery is where the body builds back stronger. There's three key drivers to recovery. We've got sleep, nutrition, and stress regulation. I often say, if you're not sleeping, you're not healing. It's during our deep sleep cycles when the body gets busy with repairing itself. With nutrition, you've got to give your body the fuel that it needs. I realized very quickly once I started doing CrossFit that I was significantly underfueled, and stress causes elevated levels of cortisol, which impair both sleep and muscle recovery. Emerging research in endurance athletes shows that sleep disturbances, stress, and poor recovery markers are strong predictors of injury risk. It's amazing how these three things are all linked together, which means if your recovery systems are overwhelmed, the body never really catches up. Especially after 40. Your training stress might stay similar, but your recovery capacity changes. The athletes who thrive are the ones who treat recovery like training. Our fourth pillar is load management. This pillar is where most of the injuries happen. Not because athletes are weak, but because load changes too quickly. A good example comes from running research again. A prospective study on Achilles tendinopathy found that increases in weekly running distance significantly increased injury risk. In fact, adding about 12.5 kilometers per week increased odds of Achilles tendinopathy roughly by 64%. That's not a weakness problem. That's a load management problem. Resilient athletes respect progression. They understand gradual overload and seasonal variation in training. Intensity is powerful, but progression is protective. Our last pillar, number 5, is our longevity mindset. And this final pillar is psychological. Resilient athletes play the long game. The mindset shifts from, can I push harder today, to, can I keep doing this for decades? And interestingly, research on masters athletes shows that aging itself does not necessarily disrupt muscle tendon function when athletes continue training consistently. In other words, aging alone isn't the problem, inactivity is. Longevity athletes stay curious about their bodies. They adjust, they evolve, and they stay in the game. So most athletes over 40 miss these pillars, and here's why. It's these three patterns that consistently show up in the clinic. Athletes chase intensity instead of capacity. High-intensity training without adequate strength or mobility is a danger zone. We often think that we chase that high of working hard and leaving it all on the floor, but at what cost? Athletes often ignore recovery. Sleep becomes optional, fueling becomes inconsistent, stress piles up. Recovery needs to become a non-negotiable. That's the silent fuel that runs your machine. And athletes dismiss the early warning signs. Small aches get ignored until they become injuries. At that point, it's kind of too late. Resilient athletes treat discomfort as information, not inconvenience. It doesn't mean that you're broken, that you've got to stop what you're doing cold turkey, but it is a warning signal. So here's your burn toolkit today. If you want to start building athletic resilience, here's a few practical steps. Train strength year-round. 2 strength training sessions per week and focus on hips, posterior chain, and core stability. Do an audit of your recovery. Ask yourself, am I sleeping 7-8 hours? Am I fueling my training properly? And just understanding that recovery is the multiplier of training. Manage your load progression. You've got to avoid those sudden spikes in your training and your volume or your intensity. Gradual progression builds capacity. Those little baby steps add up to big steps. And remember that those sudden spikes are what overwhelm the tissues. That's when we get into tissue and load problems. Address those small problems early. Pain is data and listen to it early. Don't just drive around with that check engine light on, not until it becomes an injury. And think in decades. Ask yourself one question. Will this training decision help me to still be doing this when I'm 50, when I'm 60, when I'm 70? Athletic resilience isn't built in a single workout. It's built through thousands of small, intelligent decisions over time. Train hard, recover well, stay curious about your body. And remember, the goal isn't just performance today. The goal is to keep the fire burning for decades. I'm Mark Lusk at MVMT Physical Therapy, and this is Cue the Burn. As always, check out our social media at MVMTPT and our blog and website at www.mvmtpt.com for more information. Please subscribe, like, and review our podcast. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a training buddy who plans to still be lifting, running, and moving when they're 70, because resilience is contagious.